Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Nix, and welcome back to NASCAR Mailbox. We just completed the racing for the spring race at Kansas Speedway this past week, where Kyle Larson stunk up the show. So he led 221 laps, dominated en route to his third victory of the season. It was also the first time this season that a driver won from the pole. So I have selected a question here that I'm going to expand on in more detail in this week's edition of NASCAR Mailbox. So the question I've selected is, was Kansas the latest bad race, or did it only look bad because Larson dominated? My answer to this is, in a vacuum, this race was good. It was, in my view, was not amazing, but and it's not because Kyle Larson dominated. I do not factor in driver domination into how good or bad a race is. I think of it more so, how was the track behind the race leader, Kyle Larson? How was the track behind him? How were drivers able to race? And to me, the racing quality was a noticeable step off of what it typically would be at Kansas. And I think a lot of that is due to just Kansas very quickly became one of the best tracks that the next gen car races on. And as such, I think the fan base raised its expectations. I know I raised my expectations for the race weekend. And this is one of those cases where we kind of have to take a step back, where we have not had a good stretch of races lately. It feels crazy to say this, but before this weekend's race, before this past weekend's race at Kansas, it genuinely felt like Texas was the best race out of Texas, Martinsville, Darlington, and Talladega. That should never happen. That should never happen under any circumstances. So we have had some very poor racing over the last month plus, and I think that's a bigger reason as to why maybe fans kind of got jaded with this race a little bit, where Kansas kind of became, oh wait, this is like a huge track of refuge. We're finally going to see some amazing racing after a month of mediocrity at best. And Kansas was not amazing. I thought it was good. I didn't think the race was bad at all. Like Ryan Blaney, for example, was fifth. He was fifth place, 5 seconds back with 15 laps to go. He was less than a second behind Larson when the 5 car crossed the line. He was able to drive through the field. We were able to see drivers pass each other. We were able to see a pretty decent amount of passing. We saw quite a bit of pit strategy play out as well. Lots of green flag stops. We saw lots of mistakes, lots of penalties. Obviously, the restart shenanigans in stage 3 were another contributing factor. But I think this race compared to previous Kansas races was definitely a step below. And I think combine that with the poor racing that we've been seeing, and I'm not that surprised that this race did not score very high on the Gluck poll. This race, I think, got like a 59% or something like that on Gluck's poll, which to me is about 5 to 10% lower than where it should be. I think this race should have gotten around a 70% on Gluck's good race poll. And like I said, I don't factor in domination to that. Like, there have been some amazing races where the leader was just a step above everybody else. Like, I look back at Truex's domination in the 2016 Coca-Cola 600. He led 394 laps, and that was one of the most competitive Coke 600s I've seen in quite a while. That was a really solid race from start to finish, in my opinion. Just Truex just had the whole field's number. Domination happens. I'm not saying that makes a race good or a race bad. I don't think it matters much in this situation, actually. But I think it's a combination of this race was noticeably worse than previous Kansas races with this car, and we've had some bad races lately. So I think people's expectations got raised, that people thought, oh, this is a track that could get us out of the rut that we've been in terms of the racing quality. And a good race at Kansas is a bad race by Kansas standards, and I think that's what this past weekend's race was. Where, let's go back to Texas, for example, 1 week ago. The race at Texas, a good race for Texas, Texas was a good race. A good race for Texas is really good for Texas standards. A good race for Kansas is bad for Kansas standards. So I think it was just higher expectations that people were expecting. I hate to say expecting a barn burner, but Kansas had become so entertaining that I think people were expecting a really, really good show. And it was merely good. But good is just that. It's not bad. Like, I don't think the racing was bad at any point. It's just, I think it was definitely a step below. And I think people took that into consideration when voting in the poll. I think people definitely took that into consideration when talking about it online. So, just to round this off, I don't think the racing was bad. I do think it was a step below what we were accustomed to seeing with this next gen car at Kansas, and fans took that into account. Thank you all for joining me today in this edition of NASCAR Mailbox. We are going all-star racing this week at North Wilkesboro Speedway with the NASCAR Cup Series and the Craftsman Truck Series also having a points race at the track this weekend. So I hope everyone enjoys the racing this weekend. Bye-bye.
Steven Stump of Frontstretch.com here. Come back for more great racing videos, and if you like us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.